water source is is obtained that supplies water from the first compartment, then it will spin the turbine and then the water will move to the next compartment. As long as the source of water is still running, the standard free energy is always less than 0. And this is a multi-step open hydroelectric system where the source of water will supply the water to multiple turbines. So the energy, standard free energy, is always less than 0, less than 0, less than 0. It doesn't need much. It doesn't need much energy for the turbines to spin. Okay, and finally, for our final content for this topic is the ATP as fuel currency. So, what is ATP? ATP is the ones responsible to generate energy in cell organisms. And to do work, cells manage energy resources by energy coupling. The use of an exergonic process which is to produce, to drive an endergonic process which is to consume. Most energy coupling in cells is mediated by ATP. ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, is a primary energy transferring molecule in cells. ATP is composed of ribose, which is a sugar, adenine, which is a nitrogenous base, and 3-phosphate groups. It is highly unstable molecule. When it is in a 3-phosphate group structure, it is highly unstable. But when it is in 2-phosphate chain, a phosphate group, it is stable. So we can see here energy. Okay, we focus on here first because we've missed the GIF. Okay, the high energy bond between the 3-phosphate group will be hydrolyzed using water. And then when it's cut off, the energy used to produce the energy used for an endergonic reaction is released. Same here, the structure of ATP is adenine, ribose, and 3-phosphate groups. So when one of the phosphate group is hydrolyzed or it is cut off from the 3-phosphate group, it will produce energy. So ATP as fuel currency, where the bonds between the phosphate groups of ATP cell can be broken by hydrolysis, which hydro means water, lysis means cut or broken down. Energy is released from ATP when the terminal phosphate bond is broken. When the third phosphate group is separated, it will release energy. This release of energy comes from the chemical change to a state of lower free energy, not from the phosphate bonds themselves. It takes energy to put on the third phosphate, and energy is released when it is removed. To change from ADP to ATP needs energy, but the change from ATP to ADP releases energy. How does the hydrolysis of ATP perform work? The 3 types of cellular work, which is the mechanical, transport, and chemical, are powered by the hydrolysis of ATP. In the cell, The energy from the exergonic reaction of ATP hydrolysis can be used to drive an androgenic reaction, which is the coupling mechanism. Overall, the coupled reactions are exergonic when it is in that state. Standard free energy changes are additive. The principle of bioenergetics explains how a thermodynamically unfavorable reaction can be driven in the forward direction by coupling it to a highly exergonic reaction. If we can see here, there's two conversion. This is the same conversion. The first one is the glutamic acid conversion to glutamine. Second is the conversion reaction coupled with ATP hydrolysis. And the third one is the free energy change for coupled reaction. So basically this is the same one but with different perspective. The glutamic acid conversion to glutamine is basically when the glutamic acid is bonded with the ammonia to produce glutamine. So the energy release is positive 3.4 calorie per mole. The second one is the conversion reaction coupled with ATP hydrolysis. With ATP hydrolysis, the reaction here is actually glutamic acid binds to an ATP, it reacts with an ATP, and the intermediate product is the phosphorylated intermediate, where the glutamic acid is bonded to one free phosphate and ADP. And then that is where the ammonia comes in. And then the glutamic acid will then bind to the ammonia and releases the free phosphate form and the ADP. As for the free energy change for coupled reaction, meanwhile, is when the glutamic acid reacts to the ammonia, reacts to the ATP, and produces glutamine ADP plus 1-phosphate group. So here there are two types of free energy change. The first one is through the glutamic acid and the ammonia itself to provide glutamine, and the second one is from the change of ATP to ADP, where the glutamine production produces positive energy change, but the ATP standard energy change provides negative negative calories, which eventually with the calculation eventually produces negative calorie energy change. So how the hydrolysis of ATP perform work? ATP drives androgenic reactions by phosphorylation, transferring a phosphate group to some other molecule, such as a reactant. The recipient molecule is now called a phosphorylated intermediate. Then for the regeneration of ATP, it is when ADP is bonded to the other phosphate group. ATP is a renewable resource that is regenerated by addition of a phosphate group to adenosine diphosphate, P plus ADP. The energy to phosphorylate ADP comes from catabolic reactions in the cell, to produce ATP, we need to use energy. The ATP cycles is a revolving door through which energy passes during its transfer from catabolic to anabolic pathways. So here, energy from catabolism, which is exergonic energy releasing processes, will let the ATP undergo hydrolysis with water to produce ADP plus 1-phosphate group. And then the energy will be used for cellular work, which is for the endergonic energy consuming processes. This is when ATP with 3 P's reacts with water to remove 1 P in organic phosphate to produce 1 P and ADP and energy. So to produce ATP, we need energy to use energy and then use energy from ATP to produce ADP. Okay, one of the example for usage of ATP is through transport protein and motor protein. The transport protein will obtain a molecule from one side through the energy from ATP. In this, it is considered as a phosphorylated intermediate where 1 P is associated to it. And when that happens, the 1,3 phosphate will be released, and then the molecule from this side will be transferred to the other side. As for the molecule protein as well, the ATP will bind to the motor protein and it will release energy through the removal of 1 phosphate group, and then the motor protein will move. Protein and vesicle will move, and the ADP and 1 phosphate group will be formed. Just like this. All of this transportation of proteins will use ATP whenever it moves. So for quiz 1, I think, how many high energy phosphate bonds that ATP have? The bond that ATP have, not the phosphate group, the bond. So the answer is 2, because it has 3 phosphate group and it needs to be bonded by 2 phosphate high energy bonds. Okay, that's all for our lecture this week. Hope you understand what bioenergetics are and thermodynamics and such. And if you have any questions, you can simply email me at melissa.gilbert@ums.edu.my, in which you can easily see it in the first slide of this lecture. Okay, thank you and happy learning.